views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, I'm Elliot Chaparelli, reporter and anchor at WFUV. That's the NPR affiliate station based on the Rose Hill campus of Fordham University in the Bronx. And this is Bronx Connections, a joint initiative between WFUV and BronxNet to provide thoughtful and insightful coverage of the borough. In this episode, we're taking a closer look at remote learning and the inequalities in education. Coming up, the nonprofit Teaching Matters will explain the inherent difference just a few miles can make in a student's education. And later, how a Bronx organization maintained one of the most hands-on student activities in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. We'll talk with the Bronx Arts Center about its switch to remote learning. But first, this has been a school year like no other. When the coronavirus pandemic hit, schools were forced to switch to remote learning. But the reviews on how that's gone over the last few months are mixed, to say the least. The organization Teaching Matters has been helping schools in some of New York's poorest districts navigate the challenges of having to quickly pivot to online learning, challenges the nonprofit expects to continue into the next school year. Lynette Guastaferro is CEO of Teaching Matters. Bronx Connections' George Bodarky talked with her about the organization's work in helping teachers switch from a brick-and-mortar classroom to teaching online.
Lynette, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you, George. Happy to be here.
So what's the mission of Teaching Matters?
Teaching Matters' mission is to ensure equitable access to really strong teaching, no matter what zip code kids are born in. And so we partner with some of the schools in the most kind of under-resourced communities to make sure that the teaching is at kind of the right level.
Can you explain a little bit more what you mean when you say equitable access?
Well, when you look at our school system and how resources are allocated and the challenges that different communities face, we have a situation with teaching where often the newest and least experienced teachers end up in the highest need communities. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And so they tend to need, that initial kind of like almost like internship, we don't want our new teachers learning on our highest needs kids, but that is the reality in many, many schools. And so what we do is kind of a wraparound. We partner with the school to bring very experienced consultants that are teachers that have had a lot of success in urban classrooms to get them up to speed faster.
Now here, schools are in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, online teaching. What kinds of challenges has that posed, and how are you working to address those challenges?
Well, it's I keep saying that right now, every teacher in America is a first-year teacher, and any teacher can relate to that. First-year teaching is a real steep learning curve, and because of the enormous amount that we have to learn about how to use the technology, how to do what we know how to do in the classroom, but you have to do it really differently. So the learning that every teacher is doing sort of under trial by fire right now is really the challenge. Specific to that, what are some of the particular challenges? One is just learning how to use all this remote technology. I think everyone can relate to that, or many people can, but I want you to imagine learning that technology with 30 kids on the other side, okay? Like imagine that, it's hard. So there's learning how to communicate with the kids, how to develop a classroom environment. There's creating lessons that you can really deliver remotely so that kids can access the materials, so it all has to be digital. It has to be visual. Then there's the work of assessing students, which I think is really challenging for a lot of teachers. When you're in the classroom, you can sometimes get a take who's understanding, who's not. There's lots of ways to collect information. Now, there's great techniques through the technology to assess. It's actually in some ways could be easier, but it had, for when you don't know how to do it, it's quite challenging.
What are the challenges that urban high poverty school teachers are facing in particular?
Yeah. So I think for urban high poverty teachers right now, it's about engagement. Number one is, are kids attending? Are they online? And when they are they able to really access and engage? From From one is just from a social emotional perspective. If we get them there, where are the kids mentally? And, you know, a lot of them, especially coming from our higher needs communities, we know COVID hit those communities the hardest. There's all sorts of challenges and trauma going on at home. And so the work for teachers right now is both, you know, really kind of addressing kids' social emotional, you know, some real social emotional check-ins with kids, which I think can be a really, really added service that teachers are providing families right now at home. I actually experienced it myself. You know, I'm working, my son's online, and I heard his teacher checking in with the whole class saying, let's do a check-in. How are you guys right now? How are you feeling? She gave him like 3 choices. And I heard my son open up a little bit about where he was. And I was really glad she did it, because he told her things that he wasn't telling me.
Yeah.
So one is that social emotional piece. That the second real challenge is that kids, I think the Department of Education has done a lot of work to try to get kids access by free internet and computers, but it took a while to get that access. You know, we know of a lot of homes where there's 4 children and 2 computers, and so it's difficult for them to even make the class or do the work, because they're sharing the technology. So and you know, then the other piece too is, for a lot of children, the management, the kind of planning and understanding how to do this on your own independently. For some kids, this has been amazing. They love it and they're thriving because they're kind of in control, right? And they like that. But for other kids, that has been a real stretch, and it's sort of forced them to really develop those skills.
So this is a challenge for teachers. This is a challenge for students in many ways. This is also a challenge for parents too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the challenge for parents right now, I mean, you know, on my own team, we've got a team of 50 at Teaching Matters, and I'm watching them coach teachers while they've got their kids in the background, you know, supposedly online, sometimes kind of just sitting. But the thing I've loved about this time is interacting with, no matter who you're interacting with in a work environment, you've had some child show up on someone's lap. And I think it's been very humanizing, and people are very forgiving. And I think it's been good for us, but it is exhausting, and it's every parent right now, this balance is tough.
Yeah, no question. It's actually uplifting when kids enter the Zoom. I know I find
think
it
so
uplifting.
too.
Yeah.
I'm always like, let's take 5 minutes and say hi to the kids, which, by the way, I think makes the kids relax a little bit, you know, because it's like, mom's not paying attention to me. So if you give the kids a little love, the kids relax and leave mom alone or dad.
Yeah. What age group would you say is losing out most in this age of online learning?
I think that's a great question. We have the most concerns, I think, for the kindergarten, first, and second grade students. These younger students, where reading instruction, you really need to master reading in these early years. And so for kids that are either not there, or, you know, the instruction does go slower. So there's this concern of what we call COVID learning loss. And so if students are entering next year many, many months behind, that's a challenge at every grade level. But if they're many, many months behind in reading, that's going to set them up for long-term loss. Reading is a fundamental to accessing all other education. So we're very concerned about the kindergarten, first and second. The second piece is kindergarten. These early years are where you develop the social skills, they call it executive functioning skills, like how you manage in a classroom. And so you have kindergartners that went to a few months of kindergarten and are just kind of thrown back at home. So they're going to be very behind in understanding how to just be in school. So we think that if we're going back, we have to prioritize those kindergarten, first and second graders getting back 5 days a week as possible, because those kids need to be in school.
So that should be the priority for the fall.
I think so. I think that's it. If we have to make hard choices, we've got to get the younger kids in.
I know that Teaching Matters is also very involved with helping schools develop and maintain culturally responsive curriculum. Can you talk a little bit more about that effort? Because I think that is so critically necessary, and perhaps now more than ever, one could say.
Yeah, if we couldn't be in a time where the concept of culturally responsive education is not more relevant. And the core idea behind culturally responsive education is that students can really see themselves in the learning, that they belong, that they belong to the canon that you're teaching, that they are engaged, that they are empowered, and that school doesn't feel so disconnected. And there's many, many different techniques that come under the guise of culturally responsive education. Many, many aspects of culturally responsive education are just really strong teaching practices. But there's this added element of really knowing your students. And it's more important now for a teacher than ever to come from a place of positivity around kids and not deficit thinking. Because if you're a teacher and half your kids are not showing up to class, it's pretty easy to get to start to make some assumptions. But this is a time to know your kids and know what's going on with your kids, with their families, with their home lives, to help come up with some solutions to help them engage in the classroom. And that's a piece of culturally responsive education.
How can a teacher do a self-check in terms of whether they have any unconscious bias that's affecting what they're doing in a classroom?
Well, there's many, many ways, but there's one that sort of technique that we've used, which has been very successful, which was we have a little, it's like a little app and a way of tracking over the course of a period or two who you're calling on naturally, and then look at the trends and patterns and see what you notice. And I could speak from my own years in being a student. I used to lose my mind because the boys were always getting called on, and I remember this viscerally, and it used to make me nuts. I think that teachers sometimes don't even realize maybe they're biased towards the extroverted kids. Maybe they're biased to the quiet students. Maybe they're biased to girls or boys. But like people have unconscious biases, and they do show up. And kids see them more than you would realize. And so one quick way is just to do a quick test of your calling patterns. That's just one simple one.
Also important to make sure that you are bringing in historical figures that represent the student body, right?
Yeah, kids need to, so we all participated in an education that was, not to get too, that was developed by the dominant culture. And it's a primarily white view on history. And I think the unpacking, especially when your classroom is, as kids of color, is to tell history from other points of view, really tell history from other points of view. And that requires changing even language. So I'll give you, there was a school that used to have a colonial fair, and they started to realize like the colonies, like that whole perspective, that terminology, and they threw out the word the colonies and studying the colonies, and looked at that time period of in a very different way. Who was coming in, who was being pushed out, and just change the story. Look at the story from the perspective of multiple folks. And the good news is like you need to look at who's in your classroom and say, well, what's their history, and how is this landing on them? Is this story totally making these kids check out? Because in this story, they are the victims. And so how do you study history from the perspective where kids can really find access? If you're in a community that's predominantly white and you are not engaging your kids in really unpacking history, you're not setting those kids up for success in the future workforce. They're going to have a rough road. Because they're going to be having peers and colleagues. And if they don't know the real history of the United States, they're not going to be able to participate in the conversation that's out there in front of us, around us all, and by the way, I think that's become, you can't miss that right now. And I think that's probably one of the best parts of this protest movement is, you can't walk away from this or hide from it anymore.
Yeah, I guess if nothing else, we need to see this as an opportunity for change, and change that sticks in a classroom.
Yeah.
Lynette, lots of information, lots of resources on your website, right?
Yes, and I just wanted to do a couple of shout outs. If you're looking for resources on culturally responsive education, if you're looking for resources on remote and blended learning, we created 7 weeks of student-facing digital curricula that teachers can just grab. You can search it in all sorts of ways and grab different units, culturally responsive, resources for English language learners. Come to our website, www.teachingmatters.org. There's webinars, a lot of free resources for teachers.
And we should say you also do a lot of work in the Bronx.
Absolutely. Teaching matters is, so most of the schools, a huge percentage of our schools are Bronx schools. And I was born in the Bronx. It's where my heart is. So
How
come,
strong, as they say.
strong.
Lynette, thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
That was Lynette Guastaferro from Teaching Matters with Bronx Connections' George Bodarky. As Lynette explained, remote learning is a challenge, from learning new technology to just making sure everyone has access to the tools they need to succeed. The Bronx River Arts Center, or BRAC, offers art classes as well as gallery and studio space in an area that doesn't have the same access to art as those just a few zip codes away in Manhattan. As New York City shut down in March, BRAC was determined to keep as many of their students in class as possible. Michele Brody is a program manager at BRAC. She helped coordinate the switch to remote learning. She says it took a lot of creativity to take a very hands-on activity remote. But creativity is what the Arts Center does best, and they're already looking at ways to incorporate remote learning even as the city reopens. Here's my interview. Thank you so much for talking to me today. I want to start by asking about the Bronx River Arts Center and its mission, just overall, generally.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the Bronx River Arts Center has been active in the Bronx for the last 40 years as a community-based arts organization. We've been in our building at 1087 East Tremont all that time, except for 8 years between 2010 and 2018, when we were doing a complete gut renovation of the building. So we moved back started slowly in spring of 2018, and then started up our summer programming then in that summer. And our mission really is to bring arts and culture to a part of the Bronx that has been marginalized for decades.
So what are some of the programs that you all conduct?
Right. As a facility, when our facilities open, we have a range. Predominantly we focus on our classes in visual arts. We have a professional level gallery that's at street level. We have an event space, which we offer for meetings, and that we rent out for private and also public events. And then we also have a studios program that we're going to be opening up very soon for applications for artists. We have about 8 to 9 studios for artists to apply for discounted rent.
You also try to incorporate environmental stewardship into your programming. Can you tell me about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so not too far down south from us, the Bronx River Alliance just opened up with their new building that is closer to just south and southern end of Starlight Park. And as an organization, the Bronx River Arts Center really came out of the Bronx River Restoration Project that was happening in the 60s and 70s to clean up the Bronx River. And while the adults were cleaning up the river, they started these art programs for the children in that building on the 4th floor. So because we're right next to the river and we're right along the greenway, we really try to activate that space, doing programming outside, as well as providing information to our students, and also things like using natural materials, and try to keep up a recycling program and just keep on educating our community about the natural resources around them.
So art is usually a really hands-on activity. How are you all faring having to do these workshops and programming virtually?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as we had to close down due to the shutdown, we immediately brought everything online. We were just finishing up our winter semester, and so we managed to set up Zoom and get our students, as many as we could, online to have a last class. And then we provided through our website projects that students could do on their own at home. We were going to give out art kits that we're actually giving out now, but because of limited access. We couldn't get the material, so a lot of them were just finding whatever they could. But we were able to then do a half of a semester. Our spring semester was entirely online. Our digital media teachers did an incredible job of accessing Photoshop and other programs to be able to teach our digital illustration and digital animation classes, which were very popular. And then our painting teacher, who actually left and has been isolating down in Cape May, was able to teach his very popular painting classes.
Did you see any specific pieces of art or series of arts or projects that had to do specifically with the pandemic?
In terms of the pandemic, really what we did focus on was how we did take photographs and posted those to our Instagram site of just how families were working together, and how we've been trying to do a lot of parent and child workshops. And so it was really great to see the parents with the students while they were taking classes.
Can you talk about art in protests a little bit?
Well, there's many varies. Certainly with public art, there's the statement of wanting to express one's identity, and we've done that with different mural projects. And with this is more of a combination of performance. We also have gotten a grant for community theaters community theaters of culture, and that is where we're also going to be focusing more on jazz and local Caribbean music there as well. And so I wouldn't say what we're doing is necessarily art and protest, but just more arts and education. And in that we're trying to just give a statement of that we're here, we're open, and that we don't judge anybody in terms, we don't judge their artwork or judge anyone who comes in to do artwork. And that's basically what we want to say, that we're an open place for participants to come and be a part of the community that we're creating, where it's really wanting to allow people the space to create as well as to express themselves and what's important to them.
And finally, just to wrap up, as you are looking at reopening, hopefully in the fall, what allowances have you had to make, and what plans do you have in place as of now?
Well, yes, and that's something that our director has been on the phone a lot for the cultures at 3 group calls that they've been doing practically every day at 3 o'clock. All the cultural groups throughout the city have been discussing how to move forward and to stay safe. And certainly there are guidelines that we've received from the Department of Cultural Affairs, which is our largest funder. And we are a city-owned building, and so we need to follow those. And so this is why for our first programming, we're limiting it to 10 people. Although we filled up immediately, because people are dying to get out there and create together and be a part of the community. But as of now, we're trying to see how we can keep everyone in their distance. We're probably going to have to limit the physical size, but bringing our classes virtually online has actually been very successful, and it's broadened our community a great deal. And so we had a couple people coming in from all over the country to take some of the workshops. And so I think even though physically we're going to have to limit the number of people in the building at one time, and especially in one room, we will also be able to set up the technology that we have and be able to run those classes at the same time virtually. So there can be also an interaction beyond just our walls that we're very excited about.
It's really exciting. Thank you so much. Thanks to Bronx Connections, George Bodarky, and the folks at BRAC and Teaching Matters. That's it for this episode of Bronx Connections. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Elliot Chaparelli. We'll see you next time.